Thanks for tuning in to Written on the Edge, Season 7, Episode 27. I'm Vance Bastian here with my co-host, S.A. Baz Collins.
Howdy.
We're really glad you're here with us. On today's show, Ellenzweig is a cultural critic and commentator who has published in numerous arts and general interest periodicals, including The Village Voice and Art in America, as well as the online journals Tablet, The Forward, and Poetry Magazine. His landmark history, The Homoerotic Photograph, Male Images from Durieu, Delacroix to Mapplethorpe, was published in 1992. He's a regular contributor to Gay and Lesbian Review worldwide and teaches the writing program of Rutgers University. Alan, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
So, where did you get your start being such a creative person? I mean, where did that begin?
Well, when I was a kid, I was always drawing, and my parents were not embarrassed about that. In fact, they seemed to encourage it. So ultimately, instead of going to the normal public high school in my neighborhood, I wound up going to one of the New York City specialized public schools, which was the High School of Music and Art. And that was the student body divided up between those who specialized in art and those who specialized in music. And
Neat.
So it was a wonderful experience. I didn't have to worry about, being mocked by guys on the football team because we didn't have a football team.
Nice.
We did have a track team, but we didn't have a football team. So anyway, that was my path seemed to be in visual art. I was especially interested in painting and drawing and photography.
Mm-hmm.
By the time I got to college, I went to, once again, a sort of specialized college. It's called the Cooper Union for the Advancement of Science and Art. I think that's the full title.
Ooh, neat.
It's one of the only, it may be the only tuition-free private college in the United States. But you have to, you had to get in. You had to pass through the portfolio process.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately I did, although I didn't the first time around. And so once again, I was in a very artistic environment. But as I continued doing my painting and my drawing and all of that and photography, I began to find that I was more and more interested also in writing, partly because I was very interested in reading. And I like to read, and I like to read fiction and serious fiction. So little by little, I sort of began moving over into writing. I did graduate with a BFA as an art student,
Mm-hmm.
but I really began more and more thinking about writing. My first jobs were in the art world, the gallery world in New York, and very soon I found myself writing art criticism, and those were my first experiences of being published. And I can't tell you how thrilling that was, being published.
Right.
I was making a lot of money, but I was published. And so I was published. I also did a little bit of curatorial work, which meant that I organized 2 exhibitions and wrote the catalogs for those exhibitions. But ultimately, I knew that I couldn't just survive being an art critic. And little by little, I found the ability to write criticism in other areas and also to do sort of cultural journalism. And in the mid-'80s, I was the New York correspondent for an English language newspaper, somewhat on the style of The Village Voice, which was called Passion, the Magazine of Paris. So I was writing about things happening in New York for an English language Paris-based audience. And that lasted for about 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And really by the end of the 80s, I started trying to write fiction. And I do have 3 unpublished novels in my backpack, and hope to try getting them published again. I did have agents for each of them. It never worked out at the time.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to get back to that. Anyway.
Well, we can circle back to that, but you've got a biography that just came out.
Yes, the biography that just came out is my biography of a wonderful photographer, a gay photographer from the mid-20th century named George Platt Lynes. And the title is George Platt Lynes, A Daring Eye. Mostly because what he photographed was quite daring for its time. I mean, much of his work was known publicly. He did portrait work of artists and writers. He did classical dance. He was basically the de facto official photographer of the New York City Ballet, even before it was named the New York City Ballet. So all of the companies that George Balanchine had when he came over to America, George Platt Lynes photographed the choreography. He photographed, what else? He did sort of mythological subject matter. He also was very influenced by surrealism, so some of his images look like kind of nightmares or dreamlike imagery. And then, most importantly for our purposes, he photographed the male nude, really because it was his passion. He didn't make money out of it. He couldn't publish this work. He couldn't send it through the mail. That might have been considered sending obscenity through the mail.
Right.
You have to remember what it was like 100 years ago.
Right.
Yeah. So
and those nudes were only like discovered in the 70s, weren't they? Like they went largely unknown.
Let's say they were rediscovered because they were known to his own circles. You know, people in his circles knew about them. He also, in the early 50s, was able to publish some of them in a European magazine called Der Kreis, which was kind of like an early homophile magazine. And so they were used to publishing, you know, the male nude, mostly European male nudes. And George came along and they were super impressed by his stuff. And so he published some work in several of their issues.
Okay.
That was the only real publishing he did of that work at that time. And yeah, you're right. By the 1970s, 1980s, you know, these began being rediscovered and published.
Nice. So let's jump back to his early history. He was raised, New Jersey, New England?
He was raised between New Jersey and New England. His father was an Episcopalian minister. His mother was a very beautiful woman, well-educated. She had a teaching degree from Hunter College in New York. And at one point, they moved from New Jersey to Great Barrington in the Berkshires, Western Massachusetts. And so a good number of years of his early life spent in Great Barrington. He went to rather private school, first in a place called Fessenden, which was near Boston. And then more importantly, he had 4 years at the Berkshire School, an all-boys boarding school, where he partook of being in an all-boys boarding school. You can understand that however you want. He was a naughty boy. There were other naughty boys who would never admit.
What is it about ministers' sons?
I don't know. And then, he in his graduation year, he left school a little bit early because he needed to sort of play catch up in order to have all the requirements to get into Yale. His parents were very determined that he'd go to a really good, university. And so they sent him off to Paris, where his mother had 2 cousins, adult cousins, married cousins, and they were going to they would act as like substitute parents, in loco parentis.
Right.
Fortunately for George, they didn't actually have him living with them. He lived independently in Paris. His education was more about living independently in Paris and getting to know Paris, the nightlife, and all of that, and getting introduced through his cousins to the Gertrude Stein Salon.
I was going to ask where the
connection
was. Yep.
A nice little, parish boy, so to speak, rectory boy, becomes a cosmopolitan. He's already very interested in modern literature. He gets to meet all of these people all of a sudden through the Gertrude Stein Salon. So, when he returns to America, he's not some little, greenhorn anymore. He's really quite sophisticated and very cosmopolitan himself.
And so what was the step then from that to actually photographing?
Okay. In 1927, he winds up, first of all, he thinks he's going to be a writer. He goes to Yale for a semester. not interested. Not interested in Yale. Too clubby, too all male, too masculine, too frat, frat mentality. Not
Mhm.
interested. Anyway, but because of his Gertrude Stein experience in Paris, he's recommended to two gay men who are coming to New York on business. One is the publisher, Sarah Wheeler, who would eventually work at the Museum of Modern Art for many decades. And then the other is the novelist, kind of a lost generation novelist named Glenway Westcott from the Midwest. They're kind of introduced through a mutual friend who writes to all of them and says, hey, when Monroe and Glenway come to New York, George, make sure to meet them. And she tells them, make sure to meet George. And therefore, he gets to meet them, winds up almost immediately falling in love with Monroe. Monroe and Glenway are only there for about 8 weeks, but George uses those 8 weeks to very good effect. Really falls in love with Monroe, and Monroe with him. Glenway, who after all was Monroe's lover,
Mhm.
is a little bit shunted to the side, but they return to France. George is in America. Eventually, he spends the next several years making trips over to Europe to visit them in France. Monroe gives him a sort of fold-up brownie camera on their little honeymoon to, I was going to say Capri, but it's not Capri, Corsica.
Mm.
Go to Corsica, just the two of them. And little by little, George starts using the camera to take portraits of people. And a lot of the people he meets through these very sophisticated, somewhat older Americans who are living in the south of France
Mhm.
are people like Jean Cocteau. And of course, he already knows Gertrude Stein. He meets a whole circle of people around Jean Cocteau. So he's beginning already to photograph well-known artists and writers, even as an amateur. And within a couple of years, Monroe and Glenway see that George really isn't all that interested in being a writer, but he has a real native talent as a photographer, and they encourage him. And that's the beginning of him beginning to take it seriously.
Mhm.
They introduce him to quasi-professional photographer, a woman of their acquaintance, who gives him pointers, gives him all of her equipment, because she's moving out of taking photographs into bookbinding. That's what you can do when you're rich. You go from one
I guess, yeah. Yeah.
Apparently.
Hey, photography, bookbinding, who cares? Anyway, she was very nice to him. She taught him quite a bit, gave him all this equipment. And really within a short matter of a few years, he was establishing himself as a professional photographer, mostly
Nice.
of portraits. Slowly, in the early 30s, he becomes a fashion photographer. And that becomes the way he begins making a real living. And he also has, in 1932, 2 one-man shows, 2 exhibitions in New York, and his name begins to get around.
Was that when he met Balanchine and sort of started working with that crew?
Within a couple of years, because also what he does at that time, from the late 20s to the early 30s, because he's sort of living mostly in America and then part-time in France, he goes to 2 of the really important cultural salons in New York, which are sort of like the Gertrude Stein, Alice B. Toklas salon, where again, he's meeting more artists, more writers. One of them is the salon of a woman named Muriel Draper, and the other is a salon by a married couple named Kirk and Constance Askew. And these were places, by the way, where gay people, gay artists, gay writers were not uncommon. Because if you're a sophisticated New Yorker, you can't exclude gay people from the cultural pantheon. Gay people were so much a part of modern culture and transatlantic modern culture that, of course, George was meeting all of these important people and people who could help him just by being photographed by him.
Mhm.
Because it meant that when he finally had his first exhibitions, look at who George Platt Lynes is photographing. socialites, writers, choreographers, George Balanchine, you know, he used them and they were using him.
Right.
Sort of like mutual support, mutual confirmation.
Mhm.
That's how it started and continued through the 30s into the 40s.
Very nice. Did he continue his relationship as well?
Yes. The relationship with Monroe and Glenway, which was quite complicated after all. It's not easy to maintain a throuple.
Right.
And it was never,
Especially long distance.
especially long distance, it was never an equilateral triangle. Glenway was somewhat shunted aside, but I must say, Glenway and Monroe had a real marriage. I mean, it was a loyal, committed relationship. And by the way, they had almost always permitted themselves, you know, a little something on the side.
Right.
So
The odd dalliance.
yes, absolutely. The odd dalliance. But with George, it was not merely a dalliance. So when he would go over to France, it was really George's time, you know, and Glenway would sort of, you know, respectfully step aside. But yes, ultimately in 1934, Glenway and Monroe could no longer stay in Europe. The politics of Europe was getting a little scary, you know,
Mhm.
rise to power. Things were getting more expensive since the crash in 1929. American money wasn't going as far. And so they returned to America, New York, and lo and behold, 3 of them moved in together at an apartment on the Upper East Side where they lived together until 1943. So really from 1927 to 1943, all 3 of them were in a continuing and committed, loyal relationship. More sexual for Monroe and George, less so for Glenway. Glenway, I should say, was also quite smitten by George. And George respectfully would allow Glenway to have his favors from time to time. So it was, you know, it was odd, but also understandable that in a threesome like that, you know, there are no rules. You have to make up your own.
Right. It's very queer.
It's very queer. And I compare it in the book to like London's Bloomsbury group, you know, where like everybody was sleeping with everybody. And, you know, some of them having children together, and lots of bisexuality. Even Monroe had his periods of, you know, being with women, and even George in his life had at least one very important relationship with a woman. It didn't last very long, but it remained a very strong friendship throughout. So, you know, our idea that, oh, everything was in the closet then, well, but everybody within those circles, everybody knew what everybody else was. So it was sort of out, but within a sort of limited range.
Right. Well, it was out without social media blasting it around.
Exactly. There was nobody was advertising your every move and judging you for it.
Right.
Right. If you were in the know, you were in the know.
Exactly. Exactly.
Is there anything else you want folks to know about the biography?
I would say that it's a quite complicated story because George is a complicated person. I mean, one of the motifs of his life story is that he's terrible at handling money. He loves living well. He always lives beyond his means. His younger brother is often his savior of last resort, and that's a complicated story. His younger brother, who's not gay, is also not homophobic, and he's a terrific support. He and his wife are really terrific supporters. But that's nevertheless a complicated story. And after George and Monroe and Glenway sort of break up, George has a sort of a complicated love life after that. often with younger men, because as he gets older and as he photographs beautiful men, he's often photographing beautiful dancers and beautiful models, and they're often younger than him. So he does what was done for him. Monroe and Glenway were mentors for him. He becomes mentors to younger men. And, you know, it's complicated, very complicated, but also fascinating to see how people functioned before being out was a thing.
Right.
Right. You had mentioned you had a couple images you wanted to share with us.
Sure.
Did you want to do that and tell us the story behind them?
I will do my best. Yes.
All right, fair enough.
So I'm going to share the screen for now. Here we go. So here, for example, is an early series of an early pairing of two portraits that George did before we could really say he was a professional photographer. On the left, we have Jean Cocteau in the south of France, when George and the guys, the boys as they were called, Monroe and Glenway, were living in the south of France at a hotel called the Hotel Welcome, where Cocteau and his circle were living. And then on the right, we have a photograph from 1929 of Gertrude Stein out on the street in Paris. And I always like to think that this is kind of unusual because we're always used to seeing Gertrude Stein inside in her apartment on the Rue de Fleurus with all of her modern paintings on the walls. And here she is out in the sunshine like anybody else, out in the world. So that's one pairing. And then let's see, slide 19. Yeah, let's go to 19. This is, by now, George is a professional photographer, and Gertrude Stein and Virgil Thompson have teamed up on this avant-garde opera called Four Saints and Three Acts. And among the most avant-garde qualities about it is all of the singers and dancers in the piece are African Americans, which was a decision that Virgil Thompson made. And the choreographer was the Englishman Frederick Ashton. And here is Frederick Ashton and three dancers, Maxwell Baird, Floyd Miller, Billy Smith, from the production. I think the photograph is a little problematic if you think of it in racial terms, because it certainly makes it look like Frederick Ashton is like the Lord of the Manor or something. It's kind of like racial imperialism here. At the same time, I would say it's a very beautiful photograph, but problematic nonetheless. Okay. Let's go back here. Come on. Uh-oh. No. Oh, I see what the problem is. There we go. Yeah. And then at a certain, in the 1940s, 1946 to 1948, George becomes the head of Vogue Studios in Hollywood, California, just for these 2 years. And he's principally a fashion photographer out there, but he also has the opportunity to photograph a lot of people, a lot of writers who are living out in California, and not just screenwriters. Christopher Isherwood, of course, the great novelist who wrote Berlin Stories, which is the basis of Cabaret, and Thomas Mann, author of, among many other things, The Magic Mountain and Death in Venice. And, you know, Lynes was mostly photographing indoors in New York in his studio. And I'll show you his studio portraits, what they look like. But now he's dealing with natural light. And that was a big shift for him, although I think he was quite successful at it. And
I think it's interesting that he was around Jean Cocteau, and that doesn't appear unless you have a picture where he did it of Jean Marais. I mean, considering that Marais was,
Yeah,
Cocteau's,
yes, but I'll show you
inspirational,
a
figure
photograph
and everything.
of earlier lover. In the 1930s, Jean Marais was not Cocteau's lover. So here's Cocteau's lover. Cocteau comes to New York on a round-the-world trip with Marcel Kiel, who's his French-Algerian boyfriend. 1936, George takes this wonderful photograph of Marcel Kiel with undoubtedly these drawings. Let me see if I can increase the size here. Yeah. You can see a little bit better that there are drawings on Kiel's body and on this large piece of paper.
Yeah.
I'm sure Jean Cocteau did those drawings. And here they are in Coney Island. When I say they, it's really the world's most notable gay cosmopolitan artists and writers. We have Cecil Beaton, Jean Cocteau, Glenway Westcott, Marcel Kiel, and George Platt Lynes in a professional photographer studio in Coney Island, where they all went on a lark, really because George was giving them a tour of New York and he thought they should see, highbrow New York and lowbrow New York. So here they are in lowbrow Coney Island. Yeah. So just to say that Jean Marais
Wow.
was a later lover, and at that time George wasn't really in, he wasn't traveling in Europe, so it wasn't the right moment.
In that circle.
Let me show
right,
you
yeah.
some male nudes. I think miss out on the male nudes. 30. Okay. A very early male nude from 1933. This is possibly and very likely a photograph of Lloyd Westcott, who was Glenway Westcott's younger brother. Lloyd Westcott came east from Wisconsin and made his living and life here. And then in 1950, William Harris, one of George's popular male models. And I think you can see what an aesthetic sense George had and how much dark light and shadow he used it to great effect to really model the human form. The body as a kind of landscape, a beautiful landscape of light and shadow.
Right.
And then I'll show you a more active version of the male nude that George did in probably the late 40s, I think, or I'm not sure of the date. I don't have it here. They're undated, which is why. But these are, I would say, sort of classic studio lighting of George Platt Lynes. Very theatrical. You almost look like you're watching something on stage, into stage lighting. So you have these huge shadows cast by very, very highlighted light, kind of like key lighting. And so you have it in both of these very active, the male nude in action, athletic, young, athletic, and then these beautiful dark shadows cast on the far wall. Let's see. Let me show you some more surrealist kinds of images that George did. 28. Okay. Here we have The Sleepwalker, which George did in 1935. It's actually made out of two negatives put together with, airbrushing in between, and it's quite successful. You would never necessarily know that it was two separate negatives because he fit them together so perfectly. And I would say that although this actually was one of the male nudes that was exhibited, I think one of the reasons why it was able to be exhibited is because of the otherworldly, surrealist quality of it. It is more like a dream. But those of us in the know, and I think the three of us are in the know, I would certainly
Right.
say that there's no doubt Batman's buttocks, are a dream shot that the man who's sleeping above might very well be dreaming of. That's a passage to pleasure, that crevice. That's a passageway to pleasure. So anyway,
Hmm.
I would say that there's no doubt that George was declaring himself in this image, but he could get away with it. It was surrealism. It wasn't
Oh, yes.
realism. It was surrealism. And then
Right.
I would add to show you a less explicitly homoerotic realism. These two separate shots, which you can't really say what is happening exactly in these pictures. What you can perhaps suggest, Jean Duffy and her mother. Well, is her mother hiding her eyes from her own daughter's nudity? Is there a certain shame in looking at your own child's nudity, especially if your child is an adult woman? Maybe, but we can't really say what is the narrative here. But there is this narrative quality in the image. It's like there's a story here, but we don't know what the story is exactly. And the same here, I would say. This is from 1943. Dora Maxwell, who was George's studio assistant and office manager for about 8 years. It's 1943. It's in the middle of the war. She's a nurse. Okay, it might have something to do with it.
Hmm.
Why are these men naked? Well, don't know. Are they patients? Are they insane? Are they suffering PTSD, which wasn't called PTSD at the time? We don't really know, but it is a fascinating image and was used as one of the, in the 1970s, late 70s, 80s, when Jack Woody, when his publishing house, 12 Trees Press, was used to publish many of the George Platt Lynes photographs. This was a cover photo, and I can promise you, this image of Dora Maxwell and the two male nudes sold that book, absolutely sold that book, because it was so unusual. And then to find out it's from 1943, you wouldn't know just from looking at it on the cover. It really opened up George Platt Lynes to photography, people interested in photography, late 70s, early 80s. It really put him back on the map. Yeah. And shall I just go to one more
Very cool
set of images?
Really cool.
We'll look at some dance photography that George did. And so we have here a 1936 Orpheus in Eurydice. This would have been, I do believe, a Balanchine choreographed piece. And George photographed all the famous dancers of that period, the American dancers of the period, Lou Christensen, Daphne Payne, William Mahler. And then Balanchine returned to the Orpheus myth in the late 40s, and George photographed these two dancers representing Orpheus and the Angel of Death in the underworld. He photographed them in his studio in 1950. And this is Nicholas Magallanes and Francisco Monsión, who were really stars of the New York City Ballet of the period. And what he did, however, he presented them in a way that they could not have been presented on stage. They're naked. They're completely naked in these images, but they're, incredibly beautifully shot, almost as if a kind of moonlight is cast on them. They're really quite beautiful, I think. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we'll have to go back to just us.
I do want to say, if you are an audio podcast listener, I encourage you to go to our YouTube channel and look at the images that Alan just shared, because they are beautiful and stunning. and obviously not something that's going to come through a podcast.
Right. At least an audio one.
Right. Right.
But the book is selling for sale now everywhere you can buy fine books.
It is. I would advise people. It's one caution. I'm sorry to have to say this, but at the moment it's mostly out of stock. But there's a new printing, and I'm really hoping that absolutely by the end of July it will be restocked, and you can go to any of your online sources. I would recommend Oxford University Press, only because I would say that if you go to Oxford, you can pre-order, and that's a firm commitment. But even Amazon or Goodreads or whatever, any place else you go, Powell's bookstore.
Well, we highly encourage people to go to the publisher's site if they can.
Yep, if you can.
Bezos has enough money.
All right.
He does. That's right.
So, are you doing any appearances or signings or anything for George Platt Lynes' The Daring Eye?
Yes. The one that is presently scheduled is all the way in September 20th. I'm hoping it's going to be a hybrid, because otherwise, if it's just live, not many people are going to be able to see it. It's at the Grolier Club, which is a very sort of fancy 19th century bibliophiles club, brought into the 20th century in a wonderful old building, kind of like a brownstone building. I'm going to be doing a PowerPoint presentation there. And we'll also be talking about, because it's a bibliophiles club, we'll be talking about some of the books that Monroe Wheeler published that are in the collection of the Grolier Club. So, yeah, and I will be providing, I'll be posting that on the Facebook site that I have called the George Platt Lynes Biography Project, and I'll be posting about it there.
And we have that link here for your show. All right. And you teased us that you've got some novels that you're shopping around.
Well, yes, I'm going to be starting to do that, because I wrote 3 works of fiction over the last 2 decades. That is the late 80s into the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s. And they were represented, each of them, by a different literary agent. And nothing finally happened, but I think it's time that I get back to it and make it happen.
Nice. I love that.
And of course, they all have gay content.
Well, of course.
Of course.
Any final words of wisdom?
Oh, words of wisdom. Yeah, but it's not particularly original. I really think that people need to find whatever it is you're really interested in. If you can make that a career, make it your career. If you don't get rich, but you can live off of it, find pleasure and love and enchantment in what you really, really care about passionately.
Awesome. All right, folks, we'd like to extend a huge thank you to Alan Ellenzweig for joining us today. We at Written on the Edge are proud to introduce you to new media by these queer content creators, and if you enjoy learning about our artists, please like and subscribe so you get the alerts for new episodes. Like and subscribe and check out our Patreon. If you want to see the images that he shared, check out our YouTube. And now,
and please subscribe
review.
while you're there, and tell your friends to do so as well. It
Please.
really helps us out, and it doesn't cost you anything.
I forgot. I'm sorry. All right. And now, on to our review.
Hey, gays, gals, and theys. We're here for our weekly review. And this one, we've waited till the very end of this series before we did our ratings and our review. Primarily because this show has been so epic in what it has presented over the last 7 seasons that we wanted to wait till the story was finally told before we got to have our big gay moment where all the queens screamed in the final episode. We got Dolly with the 2 girls, and we're talking about Grace and Frankie.
Wow, you just spoiled it. For everyone who hasn't seen it yet.
I'm sure it's out in the media. When it came out, I'm sure the gays screamed around the world. It was like if the Golden Girls suddenly cropped up out of. Well, no, it wouldn't be like that because that would be kind of scary.
Stop.
No one wants to see Estelle Getty out of the grave. Although it would make a really interesting horror movie.
Zombies of the Lanai.
Yeah.
Cheesecake and zombies.
Yeah. St. Olaf and zombies.
Undead with walkers.
Right. Woo! We can crank them out. Are we writers or what? All right.
Okay. That's not the show we're reviewing, by the way. Right. Grace and Frankie, go.
The one thing I will say about Grace and Frankie, above everything else, above the fact that you have two of the most iconic feminist women creatives on the planet, and how lucky we are to be alive at a time when they are in their prime. Mm-hmm. It is amazing to see Jane Fonda and Lily Tomlin, 2/3 of our Golden Gay Trio, in a series that gives people hope as they get older. Mm-hmm. That's really what this show was about for me.
Right.
Was age is just a number. It is all about what you do with what you have, and then try to make your world better. And yeah, it's gonna be messy. It's gonna be, but you know what? One of the things that Grace and Frankie learned to do was they learned to laugh at each other and support each other. And for those who don't know what the show's about, and all the children come forward, because you'll get there sooner than you think. Trust us, we know of what we speak. You think you're young and invincible now. Believe me, you will be a senior citizen the moment you turn 30.
You can stop now. Enough with the scaring. The show is about...
This show lifts you up, though. That's the opposite of what I was saying.
The show is about two either recently retired or nearly retired couples who have suddenly divorced because the husbands have been in an affair for years, decades.
20 years.
20 years, yeah. And they had been law partners, so away on business trips was not weird. And the show is about the two women learning to live with each other in the beach house after the divorce. Two women who are nothing alike and do not like each other at the start of the series. One is a very freewheeling painter. Thank you, Lily Tomlin.
Mother.
Earth Mother, at 100%. And the other is an uptight, business-starting, vodka-drinking, appearance-caring, almost socialite, who has to learn to relax. Thank you, Jane Fonda.
Right.
And it's beautiful. And as Baz said, it's messy. Their families are not perfect.
Everything. I mean, Brianna, come on, girl.
Brianna became my favorite character.
Yes.
I will say. Because the actress who played her was brilliant. She portrayed armor with empathy and a hidden emotion. And she did it so...
And still tried to cover it up and say she was still a badass.
And yes, and still claimed badass, even though she accepted a hug when nobody was looking.
Right.
Beautifully, beautifully acted. Thank you. But everybody, amazing. And, you know, the show covers some serious issues. Death. Access to basic medicine, age-related issues, things like standing up while trying to get done in the bathroom, loss of motor function. I mean, all of it. Loss of memory. It's touched on.
Sexuality.
Sexuality at, past 30.
The gay senior years.
But all of it done with so much heart and just enough comedy that you never once felt preached at. Never once. Yeah. In 7 years did you feel preached at.
Yep.
Hallelujah. We needed this series.
Yeah, it came along at the right time, and I know that both Lily and Jane have said numerous times how many women have come forward and said, I finally feel seen.
Yes.
Yep.
And
there were a lot of gay older men shaking their heads going, girl, same.
Yeah. Yep.
because it also covered the gay husbands who had to navigate their relationship on a completely different level.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there was a lot of things born out of that, and in fact, it's, end of life kind of things where things are going to get progressively worse for one of them, but that's what you sign up for.
Yeah.
It's, for better or for worse, sicker or in health, so it's what you sign up for when you're with a life partner. But
and the
it's
lesson,
done beautifully.
It is done beautifully. And the lesson from that is just take action, some action, any action.
Right.
The minute you get that one piece of bad news, do something.
And I think it's also, teaches you to live in the moment.
Yes.
To not be a bystander. Mm-hmm. Live in the moment, pick up the reins, and do something with it.
And that's, in one way or another, that's something every single character had to learn in this series.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I just, the cast was wonderful. It was brilliant. And what the gays waited for and what they kept clamoring for, and the ladies knew it, Lily and Jane knew it, and they had tried for many years to get our holy, iconic triptych of comedy, Dolly Parton, to be on the show. And they said it wasn't that she wasn't interested, she was a fan of the show, mm-hmm. but she's just a really busy lady. She's always working. She's out getting that coin, Mm-hmm. So it just happened to work out that this season, and that was the big reveal that the gays finally got their holy triptych of the three ladies from 9 to 5. So It is in this season, the final season. I'm not going to say where, but how. It is in the final season. And it's brilliant. It's just lovely to see the three of them again.
And the framing of it was 100% perfect.
Yes.
100% perfect.
Yes.
So, do we need to give numbers? Is there any doubt in anybody's mind that
no,
we're going to give
I think they're
across
just
the
fives. I'm just going to put a big old 5 on the screen.
5.
And for real, it's not even just because we loved it so much. The production quality was astounding. Inside shots, outside shots, the light quality for all of them was so perfect. And
I think the ladies wanted to end it on this high. They didn't want to keep running it out till it got boring and people weren't watching anymore. They were the ones who called and said, season 7's it. We're wrapping it up there.
Yep.
So it was something that they wanted to tie the bow on. They didn't want a studio to come back and say, oh, we're going to give you 3 more episodes and that's it. Yeah.
Nope.
So kudos to them for being in control the whole time.
Directing beautiful, casting beautiful. I mean, Lily and Jane had big time hand in the writing. The script is beautiful. I think they gave the actors some leeway to come up with some of the lines for their own characters, which is where some of Brianna's brilliance came from. Mm-hmm. I just watch it. Grab someone you love and watch it.
And Del Taco got wonderful promotion for all 7 seasons.
Okay. Because of this particular show, when I was in Palm Springs, California, from Madison, Wisconsin, and met up with my parents, the second thing my mother said she wanted to do was find a Del Taco. That was thing number 2 after her arrival in California.
Did she find one?
We found one. we stopped at the one right outside Joshua Tree Park so she could get tacos before we went into Joshua Tree.
What did she think?
She said they were better than what we've got around Madison, which is fun.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
For fast food tacos. And she was comparing fast food to fast food. We're not talking like nice sit-down restaurants.
Right.
She said they were certainly better than the 2 fast food chains we've got here. So there's that Del Taco.
Okay. But they got free advertisement for the whole season, all 7 seasons. Because it was Lily's favorite.
All right. Well, so who won your week? Or what are you watching? What's going on?
I've been watching a few things that have really caught my attention. The one I am really fascinated, it's not necessarily queer, but it is a really, really good show. And I am all about the representation that's in it. And that is a new native kind of supernatural / crime drama. It's called Dark Winds. It's produced by Robert Redford, Chris Eyre, who is a native director. He did Smoke Signals, and amongst other people. And it's got a wonderful all-native cast. It takes place on the Navajo reservation, and it's based on a book called Listening Woman by Tony Hillerman, the one who wrote all the Western novels that have native characters in it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm all about Dark Winds right now. It is a very gripping story. It's on AMC Plus for those who have AMC Plus. It is a fabulous, fabulous show. And I'm all about that representation. And it takes place in the 1970s. So it's a period piece. So no cell phones, no computers. So it's kind of cool.
Nice. We finally just paid for the Oprah network so we could watch All Rise, and we've binged the first 3 episodes of this new Under the Oprah Network series. For those of you who don't know, All Rise was an LA-based judicial story. The central character was Judge Lola Carmichael, a black woman recently elected to the the bench in LA County. But the show, much like West Wing had been at the time, was always written like right before they filmed it so they could keep current with whatever was going on in the world. So when the Black Lives Matters protests happened, within a week the characters were involved, like just walking to work sometimes. When the world shut down for COVID and the courts were trying to figure out were Zoom trials legal, they were doing that on the show. So I have always loved the immediacy of the writing of the show, and I can tell that the writers, like I said, finish the script as they're about to shoot it because there's no way they could be that current otherwise. So I wanted to see if that kept up on the new network. And it did, for the most part. There have been a couple changes that have taken some getting used to. The filming equipment is 100% different, so the film quality is very different. It's almost like they went from filming on film to filming digitally, that big of a difference.
Wow.
And so that took some getting used to. And just because of the way, the pandemic hit the acting world and casting changes and everything, they couldn't get a couple of the main characters, like Judge Brenner, who was Lola's boss, who happened to be a lesbian. She came only for the first episode just to say her goodbyes, but she was no longer able to be on the show. And Lola's husband, they had to replace. And it was almost like a Darren Stevens replacement, if that means anything to you, where I'm trying to like the new guy, and he's very charming, and had he been there from the beginning, I would have loved him. But he's not the original, and so I'm working my way through that issue too. But
it's kind of like what I liken to old soap operas, where the role of so and so will be played in this episode by, and then they walk in and you go, "Who the hell is that?"
But the thing I was looking for, the immediacy of their writing is right there because Judge Lola just had her re-election campaign, and her campaign is being attacked. And so it's very much about the political machine of elected office. And some of the shenanigans they're writing into the show we've recently seen in our own U.S. politics. So, compelling story about a powerful black woman who is trying to do the right thing as a judge. Both find compassionate solutions as well as adhere to the law. I mean, she's constantly struggling with her decisions. And the immediacy of the writing makes this a show to watch. I'm just do it. It's worth it.
Excellent. I will give an honorable mention. There is another new show. I forget what streaming platform it's on. Becoming Elizabeth. It's my honorable mention for the week. It's the story of Elizabeth I, but told from her point of view, and she's a young 14-year-old girl.
Ooh.
Very, very interesting. Very well done. Very well cast. Beautiful art direction, execution. The scripts are tight. The cast is doing a bang-up job, so that's the other thing that I'm watching also that I've just gotten into. I think Dark Winds is on episode 4 or 5 this week, and Becoming Elizabeth is now in its 4th week, I think it's coming up. So,
all right,
check those out.
All right, who won your week? Oh, wait, yours is going to be a big, long one, so I'll do my little one first.
Okay.
My week was won by Miss Dolly Parton herself for finally making it onto Grace and Frankie, but also for just the way she takes care of people. I mean, the way, she took care of her employees through the pandemic, the way she's helped the graduate students who work for her get through their education, all of it. This woman is constantly making sure the world is a better place.
And she brought the Mexican pizza back at Taco Bell.
Okay. This woman is constantly
so take that, Del Taco.
This woman is constantly making the world a better place. And thank you, Miss Dolly. You have won my week.
Excellent. And the only reason I bring that up, actually, it's really kind of funny because the people have been screaming at Taco Bell for bringing back the Mexican pizza, which is basically just 2 layers of tortillas with meat and beans and whatever.
I'm sure.
But evidently, it's one of her favorite things to have after she does a show. She liked to go to the Taco Bell and get her Mexican pizza. And she mentioned it on one of the talk shows. I think it was Seth Meyers. She mentioned on one of the talk shows, and lo and behold, no matter how much people had complained that it had been gone for over 10 years, Miss Dolly mentions it once, and Taco Bell brought it back. That's the power of Miss Parton.
I'm going to go with mine and say that she took care of people in an amazing way.
Well, she is taking care of the people. She's giving the people what they want. She wants it too, but I'm not saying it's real Mexican food. Please, I'm a Mexican. Trust me. It's not Mexican food.
So who won your week?
Okay, so who won my week this week? Actually, it's a tie, but I'm going to give the edge to Cassidy Hutchinson, who literally blew the roof off of the Trump administration. Her testimony in this week's surprise hearing, it was scheduled very last minute. It was so damning and so breathtakingly, jaw-droppingly epic that every one of the Trump crew are literally scrambling. I mean, Fox, who had not been airing them, was now starting to air these things. When it was on, a lot of the pundits from the other channels said you could just see the sprox and springs in their heads were bouncing out of their heads because it was off script. They had no way. They didn't know how to comment on it. They were literally humming because everything that they had been spouting about the president and his administration was shown to be a lie, and that they had been complicit in it. So Cassidy Hutchinson wins the week for me, but a big honorable mention and a very tight race for this week is, oddly enough, another conservative Republican, Liz Cheney. She gave one of the most scathing speeches at the Ronald Reagan Library this week in California. And if you want to hear a great dissertation of her excoriating her fellow Republicans who are complicit in the big lie, this speech was it. She lays it bare. And if she's going to go out this way with this big of a bang, more power to her. I don't agree with anything she stands for, but in this case, being an American means she's doing the right thing, and she's calling out her fellow party members for being complicit in the big lie. So, that's who won the week for me.
Nice.
See, it wasn't that long.
A little more impactful than my frivolous fluff.
No, Miss Dolly reigns supreme.
Fair.
She is a goddess in the gay pantheon. That will never change.
Fair. All right, folks, Written on the Edge is produced by Real Ravens Media. For our disclaimers, links to social media, our listen stations, or to sign up as a guest, visit www.rotepodcast.com. If you enjoy learning about new artists, please like and subscribe so you get alerts for new episodes. Please like us and subscribe on YouTube. Help us get to someplace meaningful with those numbers. And tune in next week for your queer media fix. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Closing time. The bums rush in melody, dear.